Hello and welcome to part 5 of trying to read the entire Bible. So for today's update, I just started Samuel. So we've done Joshua, Judges, and Ruth since the last video. And honestly, these were some interesting books because it kind of shifts from, the books of Moses definitely were very much so like they were the books of Moses. Like they definitely had like a little bit different of a vibe than moving out of the books of Moses and into Joshua. The Israelites just kept doing interesting things. They're really good at being interesting. But one of the things that I noticed going through these books is that a lot of the stuff in here is really just like little stories like about people's lives. And it's interesting because I noticed there are actually quite a lot of like little like love romance stories going on in the Bible. Like obviously I just read Ruth, so we had the story of Ruth and Boaz, and like it's just a short little story, but like it's interesting to be like, so it's just a story about you know a girl whose husband died, but she decided to stay true to her commitment to her mother-in-law, and so she's like, yeah, I'm gonna stay with you. And like I feel like there's a lot you can learn from that. Like it's kind of random and not like inherently like spiritual. Like at first glance it's just she's just like, oh yeah, no, I'm gonna stay with my mother-in-law instead of going back to like where I was born. But it's like I feel like it teaches a really important kind of like story about like compassion and loyalty, which are, I feel like, very godly attributes. And so it's interesting how even in that story where it's like it wasn't necessarily about like a prophet receiving guidance from God for all the people, but it was like there's still little things in there that like kind of teach you. And like I feel like there are a lot of stories in the Bible that I've been noticing that are like that are just kind of just little random quick one-off stories. And I mean, obviously it's like there's the whole like line of families and like the family tree and stuff, and so the important people that came from Ruth and Boaz that definitely apply to later stuff. But I feel like for me, like it's really made me realize it's like I think God puts a lot of value on just those little stories, just those little things in our lives. And I feel like I spent so much of my life trying to focus so much on like the exact teachings and the exact like guidance that I can get and being told what to do essentially. But it's like, sometimes like you look at these Bible stories and some of them really are more about just like some of the little ways of living. And yeah, sure, there are a lot of people in the Bible doing a lot of not great things, but it's like despite that and those times when it's like it's highlighting somebody that maybe as a bad example, there are a lot of good examples of just little ways to live a more godly life. And it's kind of cool to like get to spend time trying to like look for those and learn from them. And it's really interesting. Like it's made me think a lot about like what does God really want us to be getting out of the Bible? Why is it that these are the books that are in the Bible? And obviously it's like at the end of the day, obviously God's hand was very much so a part of the Bible coming about. But it's like at the same time, it's like a lot of this stuff like was chosen to be put here by human beings. And like yes, most if not all of them were trying to be guided by God in their actions. But at the same time, it's like it still was done by human beings. God himself didn't, necessarily like organize the whole Bible and be like, yep, this is what I want you guys to have. Like I'm sure that he guided the people that did end up choosing like what to keep in the Bible and how to translate things. But it's like at the same time it's like there's still going to be some level of like human error. And so where I'm getting with that is it's like it's interesting to kind of take all the different things in the Bible and try to figure out, it's like, okay, so like what of these stories is probably what God wanted the most so to have in here. And like obviously that gets really deep into like a lot of like more hypothetical stuff and personal revelation, but like it's been interesting to me to be able to kind of like look at it in that way and kind of just ponder it and think about the things in there and the things that really like that I feel like I see the value in being there. And then kind of looking at those things that I struggle to understand the value as much and being like, well, how can I make this worthwhile to me? Or is it like, is this even something I need to worry about? And like, there's always a chance that, I go through the Bible again next year and I get something completely different from sections that now I'm like, why is that even included? And so that's one of the things that I think is just so beautiful, is that it's like, the going through the Bible is such like a personal experience, but it's like even just from, last time I read through the Bible, I had a very different experience than now. Obviously, I don't remember it as well. It was like a few years ago, and it wasn't really as like focused and as intentional as I would have liked it to be. Like, it was more just so because, my whole family was doing it, and like, and just this and that. I don't even know if they actually were, but it was, just kind of like a whatever sort of thing. And so it's like, I already feel like I'm getting a lot more and different things out of it now. And I'm looking at it with a very different perspective, because obviously my perspective just on life and existence has changed over the last few years. And so it makes sense that like the things that I am reading, I'm going to be looking at differently now. And so, yeah, that's been really neat. And it's definitely kind of given me something to think about as I'm reading each of these books, especially as I'm like getting into stuff that I'm not as familiar with. I mean, obviously it's like I knew the story of Ruth and Boaz, and as I'm getting into Samuel, it's like I know a little bit about the story of Samuel, and like, but it's interesting because it's like there are a lot of little details and stuff that it's like obviously I didn't know as well, and like, some of the stories I have memorized, and other ones it's like I know the gist of them, but it's like actually like going through the Bible, hearing them, like really being able to think about them, and not just like the actual words of the story and like the events, but like the deeper impact and like the spiritual guidance that comes from it. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely some stories that I'm like currently like I don't see the spiritual guidance here, but that's okay. Chances are I either will later, or maybe it's just okay and I will never get that specific, section. And it's like, it's okay. I'm obviously kind of figuring out a lot of this as I go. I've never like done such a focused reading of the Bible. And so it's like I'm very much so like in a starting place. Like, yes, I've been Christian my entire life, and yes, I've always kind of known the Bible, but it's like I'm really looking at it with a new fervor that like I've never necessarily had towards it before. And so it provides kind of an opportunity for a lot deeper of reflection and a lot more of like a meaningful and profound study. And so yeah, it's really interesting to just be looking at these stories and, pondering why they're included specifically. And I feel like it's also definitely made me think about the way that I live my life and like the priorities that, it's like, what are the things that I get so caught up on that God's probably like, that doesn't even matter. Don't worry about that. Because I'm sure there are plenty of things in my life like that. As somebody who's dealt with a lot of anxiety and who definitely gets overly attached to certain things, like to certain principles or rules or ideas, and then just kind of like obsesses over those. It's like I definitely believe that there's a lot of time in my life where I've just been unnecessarily focused on the wrong things. And so it's like as I've been going through the Bible, I feel like it's kind of helped me to like deconstruct that a little bit and be like, all right, so like based on the things that like the trends in the Bible, based on the things that God seemed to consistently think was important for his people to like to know and to do, it's like how can I kind of use that as a tool to understand where I'm at a little better and understand where God wants me to be. Because for most of my life, it's like I've just followed the rules that other people have told me, or done the things that other people said were the right thing to do. Because it's like I just assumed that, oh, if somebody's telling me this is the right thing to do, then yeah, they're probably right. They probably know more than me. And like, yes, sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes they don't even want what's best for you. Sometimes their intention is very selfish. And it's like, it just kind of like growing up has made me realize that and acknowledge that it's like I can't always just trust what other people tell me, or trust trust rules essentially in the way that people have it like described and explained them to me. Because it's like, they're not always going to be right, and I might not always understand correctly. I feel like that's such a big thing too, is it's not always necessarily that other people are wrong or that they're telling me something incorrect. It's that my understanding of what they said is incorrect. And so it's like, as I'm going through the Bible, it's like I am really trying to deconstruct that and kind of work through the, the whole like these rules that I follow just because I remember at some point somebody told me this was how it was supposed to be. And like looking at it more like, okay, let's not just function that way and let's actually try to learn these rules and these principles. I feel like that's one of the biggest things I've like felt and noticed is like I feel like God cares a lot more about principles than he does about like specific rules. Like, yes, like there were times like with the law of Moses and stuff where there were certain very specific rules put in place, but like later the law of Moses was fulfilled, stuff kind of changed with that, and there were definitely other times where like the exact commandment or whatever that God was giving his people kind of varied in, what seemed like, intent or direction. And it's like, and as I've kind of analyzed that more, it's like over and over again, it's like I'm noticing it has a lot more to do with like the overarching principles and like the levels of progress. And that's definitely made me think a lot about like the things that I focus too much on the actual rules or like the set in stone guidance rather than more so the principle behind them. Because at the end of the day, following a rule just because it's the rule and it's what you're supposed to do, like that does not impact you as deeply as following a rule because it follows an overarching principle that's deeply true to you. And so I definitely like I think there's a lot of room for improvement in my life in more being focused on the actual principles behind things. And so that's kind of my goal like for this next little bit is like I'm going to work on kind of looking at the things that I do and finding the principle behind why I do them or seeing if I'm doing something just because and there's no principle behind it. Like maybe, I would be better off without being so obsessed with that in my life. So that's kind of what I'm working on, and honestly, I'm excited about it. Like, I feel like it's going to create a lot more meaning in the things that I do and in the way that I live my life, and it's going to allow me to be more intentional, which is super important because the more intentional you are, the easier it is to accomplish your intentions, your goals, the things that you're going for. And I'm just excited about it. I definitely think that this is going to help enlighten me and help me draw closer to God, improve who I am, and to really like have a reason behind the things that I do instead of just, oh, because somebody told me this was the right thing to do. It's like, no, I did this because based on my understanding of the Bible, this is how God wants us to live, and because it's something that helps us grow, that brings us closer to him. It's like it needs to be about the principles, and I'm really excited about that. But yeah, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.